What's going on, everyone? Happy New Year and welcome to another BuzzBeat episode. This is Richie, and I'll be going live solo on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter video right now. Brian and I were able to go live earlier in the day where we answered some listener questions about the young core of the Hornets. We tried to pinpoint future skills for upcoming draftees. We looked at the players this season that have been the ones on the rise, the ones that have made the most noticeable dips. That will be the second part of this episode. I really don't plan on spending too much time on this game because even though I enjoy looking at the on-court action, I know the discussion about this team is much larger than that. And what's happening on this road trip right now is not good. There are certainly bigger fish to fry, and we will talk about some of that big picture stuff in the second half of this episode. I think what makes this game even less meaningful than it already is just the list of injuries that are starting to pile up. They made a mention on the broadcast that this is the 13th different starting lineup, and we are in game 31. Terry Rozier missed his first game. Well, this is his first game missed with I think flu-like symptoms. Mark Williams, this is 11th straight game missed. Gordon Hayward, he has missed 3 straight games. LaMelo Ball, I believe this is his 16th game missed this season. And obviously Frank Ntilikina has not played at all. So with his leg injury. Final score of this one, 111 Denver. Charlotte got 93. It was a very odd game, especially in the first half. Neither team was all that effective in those first 24 minutes. And if you watch the first Denver game in Charlotte, this one felt very similar. Jokic seemed very disinterested in shooting the ball. In the first half, just looking up Jokic's line, 2 points, 8 rebounds, 5 assists. And he only took one shot, and that came very, very late in the first half. And I think he's a player, obviously, that can just he knows that he can turn it on, especially against a team like Charlotte that's depleted. And we saw last time when Charlotte played the Nuggets a couple days before Christmas, this is exactly what happened. If you remember that game, the Hornets really, really struggled in the third quarter. They were outscored 30-9. And in the third quarter, Denver started on a 20-2 run, and we saw that change in Jokic's mentality. And he took like 4 or 5 shots within the first handful of possessions, and that switch was flipped for Denver. And they know they can do this against Charlotte. They know that they can do this against a depleted team, and they put up 40 points in that third quarter. And on Twitter, you can go check my Twitter right before half. I said it that I was nervous about this third quarter because Denver was really just going through the motions. I would not say the game was close at half. It was not tied at 49 because the Hornets were doing something special. That wasn't the case. It just felt like Denver knew that they could flip a switch at halftime like they did in Charlotte and come away with the same outcome. Jamal Murray was awesome for Denver as well, in addition to Jokic. But let's get into the Hornets side. I do have a comment here, which I think is a pretty cool one to look at from Regulator. Is there a danger that the young players will be worse off or learn bad habits from these games? I can't imagine how the players feel with this streak now at 11. It's a very interesting comment. Obviously, the Hornets now have the longest losing streak in the NBA, 11 straight games, as Detroit the other day beat the Raptors after the Raptors made that trade. I do think this is a valid point. These younger players coming in and losing game after game after game. They're not surrounded with some of the veteran players that can show them the ropes. And yeah, it could potentially lead to some bad habits. And I think where I want to start with is Brandon Miller. He's the guy that I think all the focus should be on as we go through these next handful of games. If we're assuming some of the players that are injured now are going to be injured for the next 4, 5, 6, 7 games, he's a guy that you're going to want to look at moving forward. And you're going to see some bad. Um, there was one bad habit play that I saw. I wouldn't necessarily say it was because, they're on this road trip per se, but there was one bad habit play that I did not like. We saw more of the offense run through him, more shots came his way. And that's just the pure fact that there are a ton of injuries on this team. And early in the game, we saw it. He was going to be this high usage guy for Charlotte. A lot of the possessions ended up with the ball in his hands. He didn't shoot the ball well from the field, but we saw a little bit of everything. We saw him show some on the ball work, operating at the pick and roll, pulling up. He tried to draw some fouls. He got an and one against Reggie Jackson around the free throw line in the first half, where he was actually able to pick up 4 points on the play because Jackson received a technical foul. His 3-point shot was not on, but we saw a little bit of that too. I think the one thing that I keep repeating myself with Brandon Miller is that if he can fix or he if he can fix the strength aspect of his game, if he can get stronger like this offseason, that should be priority number one. I think a lot of the other little stuff will start to follow because he gets pushed off his path too often. And I know there was the story over the summer where he was dealing with mono, and it took him a long time to recover from that. I think a lot of these turnovers that you see with Brandon Miller, bad passes, traveling calls, just any kind of actual turnover, a lot of it is set up prior to the actual pass or is set up prior to the actual travel because he is pushed off his path. He's driving, he can't withstand the contact. He might drag his pivot foot accidentally, and that's exactly what happened in the first quarter as he was called for a travel. So I think the handle definitely needs to tighten, but I think the strength needs to get to a point to where he can withstand contact. Because I think at this point, he is a very good spacer, 3-point shooter. But what we're going to see now in these next handful of games is the ball in his hands a little bit more, running the pick and roll. Um, so yeah, the point that I was trying to make earlier about bad habits, this was not a turnover, but I think the decision at the end of the first half where he decided to drive, it was like a semi-transition play. He was really like the only Hornet kind of like on the screen. Most were probably in the backcourt or just kind of like out of the picture. And there was 10 seconds left that they could hold for the last shot. He missed this contested layup. I think if he made it, I wouldn't be talking about it. But you have to make that shot in that situation for that decision to go right. There's just too much time left on the clock for Denver. Ultimately, Denver did not make the shot prior to the half. But I think this is just what we're going to see with a rookie like Brandon Miller is going through these growing pains and little things like miscommunication on defense or picking up a guy in transition, just making the right play. So to Regulator's point in the chat, these habits can start to go the opposite direction. He and PJ, for example, had a miscommunication on a split cut with Jokic receiving the ball at the free throw line. Miller and Washington ended up on Murray down near the basket where it left Aaron Gordon for a wide open 3-point make. To me, it looked like PJ communicated the switch. Obviously, we're not down on the court, but it looked like he mouthed something to Brandon, but I guess we'll never know for certain. But these are the growing pains that we're going to see with Miller. And these are the things that you want him to work on. Like you want him to work on it this season when there's not much at stake. I think that's probably the best perspective that we need to take with Brandon Miller. He finished with 15 points, 5 rebounds, 1 assist, and 2 turnovers. And like I said, his shooting was subpar tonight. Miles Bridges finished with 26 points, 9 rebounds, and 5 assists. But if you were to watch his first quarter, that was one to forget. He felt very non existent in that quarter, but he kind of flipped a switch, turned it on in the second quarter where he had 12 points in that second period, perfect from the field, 2 of 2 of the rim, 1 of 1 in the paint, one of one on a baseline jumper, and then he hit a right wing three as well. I think he's one of the few guys that I've mentioned this time and time again. One of the few guys on this roster that can drive the basketball. I don't know if he was like outstanding against Denver driving the ball, but he hit a couple of shots getting into the paint off the bounce. I just think that we're seeing it at a less consistent pace this year. And we've also seen it in previous years where he can hit it with either hand. He had a driving right-handed layup in the third quarter. He had a right-handed floater from about like 8 feet away in the fourth quarter. He goes to that offhand often around the rim. And Bridges finished 3 of 5 inside that restricted area. So that's one area that you can always kind of count on with Bridges is the driving ability, using that athletic and that power and that strength to get to the rim, and his handle has tightened over the course of his career. But overall, on the opposite end for Bridges, he seems so disinterested on defense. He's not picking up in transition. He's going under screens, and I think sometimes when you go under screens, it shows a lack of, I guess, effort and desire. It's almost like he wants the shot to go to the shot to miss so that people won't focus in on the end result there. But like I'm noticing that these little like moments in time on defense where he's just doesn't seem all that interested, even if the opposing team misses it. Like that's the stuff that I know that coaches pick up on, and that's got to change for him, especially in this new front office, new ownership, to see him as a piece moving forward. He needs to offer some things that others just don't, which he does. Like you can't teach the athleticism, but the lack of awareness and desire on defense is just too frequent for my liking. He has all the physical tools. He has all the physical tools on that end, on both ends, but we're just not seeing the results um, on that end. I thought Nick Richards as well was fairly solid. Um, but there's a part of me that knows that Jokic deep down, like knows when to contest him, knows when to give him a difficult time. It just felt like Jokic, I wouldn't say took possessions off, but he knew that he could expend some energy on offense. And, the Hornets running offense through Richards out of the dunker spot wasn't going to be something that could be sustained or produce any kind of positive results that would propel Hornets to a win. Richards did finish with 15 points, 8 rebounds, 2 of those rebounds being on the offensive end, where he also had 4 second chance points. He was pretty good around the rim, like he always is, going up for dunks. He had a couple of finesse plays too. I don't necessarily watch him and think finesse, but he did have a hook shot over Murray in the first quarter and then a push floater off the glass. I think that was like late in the second quarter. But yeah, he's been one of the better finishers in the restricted area in all of the NBA this year. But if he could add a little bit more skill, a little bit more finesse, that could go a little bit more in adding variety in his game. But to be honest, I'm not really expecting it all that much. Let me run down the other guys from this game before we get out of here. I mean, there's not much to talk about in this game. This is the same story, same script. Ish Smith, he received his championship ring before the game. You could definitely tell that he's loved inside that Denver locker room, the way that he was treated, the way that the Nuggets reacted pregame and postgame with him tells you everything you need to know. And you almost wonder if Ish Smith wasn't on this team, like who would be the guy that they would lean on as a veteran? I'm not sure. I mean, I guess Terry Rozier to a certain extent, but I think Ish is a very well respected guy around the league. In this game, he had his mid-range shot working. It's the one area of the court that he actually likes to shoot from. He's a guy that passes up on threes, which is totally fine in my book, but he was 4 of 4 in the non-paint mid-range attempts against the Nuggets. He's got a very odd shooting motion. I don't know if you guys have ever kind of like sat down and either watched it in slow motion, but it's very odd. But somehow it still goes in, or at least it went in tonight. He finished with 10 points, 3 rebounds, and 4 assists. Regulator in the chat says it's good to have Cody Martin back. He had 6 assists. I actually didn't have a lot of notes on Cody Martin in this game specifically. There was one possession in the first half where it was like a step up screen from Aaron Gordon, like a 21 action in semi transition, and he freely switched on to Aaron Gordon and allowed PJ to take his man. And so obviously he's giving up height and some strength, but he was still able to get the block on Gordon at the rim. And while he did finish with 6 assists, he only finished with 2 points and 3 rebounds. But yeah, it's good to see him back on the court after, missing basically all of last season and taking a while to kind of ramp up for basketball activities this season. It's just a shame that he can't play with the full complement of players right now. Like, I think he's a guy that is a complementary player. And for him to be playing with this ragtag group, you're just not going to see much because he's not a guy that is going to create a lot of offense for himself. Nathan Mensah drew another charge in this game. That was really the only note that I took about him. He's now up to 4 charges drawn on the roster. That's 5 behind the leader on the team. Brandon Miller has 9, but also he's played in 20 less games than Brandon Miller. So Mensah, 2 points, 4 rebounds, only 12 minutes of play. And again, he's filling in, or at least trying to fill in for spot minutes, as Mark Williams has missed 11 straight games. And then the last note that I took, just real quickly, if you need to know how Clifford feels about JT Thor this year, just look at his minutes in this game. Depleted roster, 5, 6 people out, cannot play. With all these guys out and injured, he still only gets 4 minutes. And I'm not sure he would have picked up a single minute had the Hornets actually made this game competitive. Like, these were all garbage time minutes for JT Thor. He is a guy that has probably been one of the more disappointing players on the roster. And I will say, like, he's not expected to do a ton. And I think last season you saw after the All-Star break how he started to pick it up from behind the arc and shoot the ball well there. He has not done that this season, not shooting the ball well from behind the arc. And he's not a guy that's going to drive and, get to the rim at a very high rate. You can kind of look at his frame and tell that it's just probably not part of his game right now. And he's a very much a catch and shoot 3-point shooter. And because they're not falling, there's not much else that he adds. I think defensively, he's taken a step back. So he's a guy that feels like would be a Clifford-esque player. But, the fact that he only got 4 minutes in tonight's game really tells you everything that you need to know. It's one thing if this team was at full health, but this team was very shorthanded, and he got garbage minutes really for this game. So the final score again was 111-93 loss. The Hornets are now 7-24. Denver bumps up to 24-11, currently third in the West. Like I mentioned earlier, Charlotte's longest losing streak in the NBA has been extended to 11 games. And next 3 games for the Hornets: Kings and Bulls on the road. And then they return home after their I think it's the longest road stretch of the season, back on January 8th. They get the Bulls again. Yes, regulator. Book Night and Thor are living in the same doghouse. Yeah, even Book Night can't get minutes. So, Book Night, who seemed promising at one point, I'm not even sure how you would even trade that guy. Like, he would just be, a filler to kind of make salaries match, or kind of be a sweetener. Like, he's not a guy that has a lot of value around the league. So I appreciate you guys tuning in for my quick solo podcast. Stay tuned for the episode, the second half of the episode. Brian and I went live earlier on YouTube in the day, answering some questions from our listeners. I hope you guys have a good one. Have a good new year. And if you tuned in late, this will be out as a full 40, 50-minute episode in addition to that second segment with Brian.